Welcome to the S2C cast, the podcast advocating for the S2C haploinsufficiency community by broadcasting the voices within. I'm Eli.
And I'm Haley. We are parents to a boy with MCHS and autism, sharing our journey with you throughout conversations grounded in learning, support, and community.
This is Advocacy Amplified. Do you have questions, comments, or a story to share? Want to be a guest on the show? Connect with the S2C cast on Facebook, s2ccast.com, or email us at mef2cast@gmail.com.
If you enjoy the show, please support us by subscribing to the show on Apple and Spotify, leaving us a review, and following us on social media. You can also buy S2C cast merch at our Shopify store, linked in the podcast description. The S2C cast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and not necessarily of the podcast or its sponsors. This is not medical advice. Consult a healthcare professional for medical concerns.
Alrighty, hi everybody. Welcome to the S2C cast. Our guest today is Sam Fox. She is a speech-language pathologist, a spelling to communicate coach. Is that the correct term?
Practitioner would
Practitioner.
be
And owner of Beyond Speech Therapy Center in Munroe Falls, Ohio, which is in the Akron area. So can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved with just like why you decided to become an SLP and then how you got involved in spelling specifically?
Sure. Yeah. So I thought most of my life I would be a middle school math teacher and realized pretty quickly that was not the right path. I started looking at different majors in education, health, and human services. I came across speech pathology and kind of just chosen on a whim, to be honest with you. From there, I have such a special story in terms of how I got to where I am because I was looking for volunteer opportunities. Graduate school is very competitive, and so I knew I needed to get some volunteer hours. I was lucky enough to meet a little boy at the time whose name is Caden, and he was 7. And so his mom had posted flyers at the university looking for volunteers to just come play with him, work with him on his communication. He is autistic, and he also has apraxia, which we will talk more about, I'm sure, here. But I started volunteering with him, and I knew very little about autism and nothing about apraxia when I started working with him. And I just fell in love working with non-speaking individuals at that point. And once I had gotten through graduate school, that was that's where my focus was. I wanted to support minimally speaking, non-speaking individuals. And I had a few years out of school where I was working with them. I was using more quote unquote traditional speech therapy methods, and I was just seeing very little progress with open or robust communication. So Caden's mom, whose name is Jen and I stayed in contact. Of course, I was very, very close with Caden, worked with him for years. And I reached out to her and I said, I'm working with a lot of guys who remind me of Caden, but I'm just kind of hitting this wall. And I had known a few years prior while I was going through graduate school that Caden had started spelling to communicate. And so, his mom said to me, I really think you need to look into this. I think this is the piece that you're missing. And I Googled it and saw both sides of the spectrum in terms of people's opinions and really struggled for about a month on whether it was something I wanted to learn more about just because of what was out there. But at the end of the day, I kind of thought, well, I'm going to take the course. I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to see if I think that this is something that's legitimate that can help people. I knew that I never doubted that Caden could spell. So I would watch him spell. My kind of trip up, and it is a lot of people's as well, is thinking he's the exception. So yeah, he can do it. I believe fully that he can, but are my guys who have, the diagnoses attached to them with severe to profound language and intellectual disabilities going to be able to do this? And at that point, Caden had spelled out to me my favorite quote of all time, which is, "Your awesome and powerful heart to love the strange and fabulous people like me." And so I watched him spell that, and he was, gosh, he had to have been about 14 at the time. And I was like, all right, well, I have to learn more now. I had definitely have to take the course. And everything from there has just guided my career. And I work almost exclusively with spellers now.
That quote is beautiful, and it's interesting to me that almost all spellers, that the way they speak is like almost prophetic, like not
Yes.
in the literal religious sense, but just in sort of the way they phrase things. Every one of them that I've seen speaks incredibly beautifully and, not the way that you or I would speak, but it's
Yes. They're
just
very
really
eloquent.
interesting that, yeah.
Yes.
Um, so can you give us just kind of a real broad overview of the spelling to communicate system, and then we'll start going through like maybe some more specifics.
Yeah.
And can you touch a little bit on the controversy that's associated with it?
Yes. So there are different forms of spelled communication. So if you look at the umbrella as spelled communication, that's going to include somebody typing. That's going to include somebody using, if you've seen videos, somebody with a stencil poking through letters, somebody touching letters on a laminated letter board. Those are all forms of spelled communication. I am trained in spelling to communicate, or S, the number 2C would be the shortened version of that. And what S2C does, it is a form of alternative communication for individuals who cannot rely on their speech. They may be not completely non-speaking. They may be minimally speaking, a few words here and there, or they could be unreliably speaking, meaning what's coming out of their mouth is not what they are intending to say. And it can be kind of deceiving because those individuals sometimes have what people would consider to be a decent amount of speech. They can pick it up a toy and say, the blue whale is swimming in the water. But then you ask them a question about something they just watched or heard, and they aren't able to get that out with their speech. So I could go into why that is too, but just so we know who spelling to communicate is going to be beneficial for, it's going to be anybody who cannot comprehensively express their thoughts with speech. And so with that, the method itself is going to target the brain body disconnect, which is apraxia. So apraxia is the piece where people say, well, who what kind of diagnosis or difficulty is somebody going to have that's going to benefit from spelling to communicate? There are a ton of individuals who are spellers who are autistic. There are individuals who have Angelman syndrome, Down syndrome, many, many syndromes. I could not name them all who would benefit from this. At its core, what they all have in common, so the prerequisite, if you will, for spelling to communicate is global apraxia. And so apraxia is a disconnect between the brain and the body, meaning they know exactly what they want to say, but when they try to move all of the muscles in their mouth to say it, it's just not going to happen, or it's going to happen very inconsistently. And then that also applies to their entire body. So we give them a direction that their body hasn't followed 4 million times, and then they can't do it. That is often not because they're in their own little world or because they don't understand what we're asking. It is because they do not have the body control. Their brain is telling their body all the little things it needs to do, but the body is not responding in the way that they want. And so with global apraxia, I will say I've never had anybody come to me with a diagnosis of global apraxia. I have had a few come to me that have an apraxia of speech specific diagnosis, but I always say to families, I don't want you to say, oh, well, my child doesn't have that diagnosis, so they're not going to benefit from this. It is very, very possible that they do have apraxia. It is just undiagnosed because there is so much that we do not know at this point. But it's pretty clear when I get in there and start working with individuals that you can see the apraxic tendencies, if you will, at that point. So spelling to communicate, it is an alternative form of communication. And sure, there are so many different types of alternative communication, right? There are pictures, talkers are what a lot of these individuals have. Those are not invalid forms of communication by any means, but the difference is that spelling to communicate is targeting that brain-body disconnect. We are looking at the motor plans and teaching them, here's where your eyes need to go. Here's where your arm, extend your arm forward. Where those more traditional forms of alternative communication are not coaching the body on what it needs to do. It's really the biggest piece that sets it apart from the other methods, in my opinion. When we start to target the root of the issue, that apraxia, or getting their body to do what they want it to do, the progress that I have seen has been night and day compared to those more traditional methods. So there is a hierarchy. I'm not sure if you want me, would you like me to kind of go through the hierarchy of what that looks like?
Of course.
Of what? I'm sorry?
The letterboard, sorry, like getting to the
Oh,
keyboard.
how you work through, okay.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah, and
you got
just
it.
I just wanted to throw in
Yeah.
a couple things. So you talked about unreliable speech. An
Yes.
example I heard in a different interview, it was a family from Tampa Bay.
Mhm.
There's apparently quite a community of spellers down there for
There
whatever
is.
reason.
Yeah.
And this guy does his son is a speller and his family does personal training for other spellers. But the dad brought up that like people spellers will walk up to him every time they see him. Hi, what's your name? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite animal?
Yes.
And if they didn't have the ability to spell, you would just assume that they lack the capacity to remember that stuff. But then when they spell to him, they say, "Hey, I'm really sorry I have to ask you those things every time. I just can't help myself." So, just another example of like how things might not be as they appear with that unreliable speech.
Exactly. I mean, and that's such a common core is, and my spellers have said this in a million different poetic and beautiful ways, but basically don't judge a book by its cover. Look beyond the surface, because what you're seeing with their body is just not representative of who they are, and what they
Right.
are capable of, truly. So it is one of those things. It's especially challenging when you have a non-speaker, though, because they can't use speech. What do you rely on?
Right.
Their body language and their gestures and what they're showing you, which makes perfect sense. But they have told us, spellers themselves have said over and over and over and over again, basically, you cannot trust my body. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's never what they intend,
Mhm.
but it does mean that they have difficulty with the control. So it's one of those things where the letterboard or the keyboard spelled communication is going to allow them to clarify,
Yeah.
was that what you just saw with my body what I actually meant to do, or was it not? So it's a great tool for that.
Right, yeah, and I don't wanna drag us off on too much of a tangent this early, but, a lot of spellers express the fact that they didn't even know they had hands or fingers or legs, or, like,
Yes.
they don't know that they have a body. They're a mind floating through space in their
There you go.
perception.
Yeah, they can't feel their body in space, quite literally. Yes.
Right, yeah,
So it is, you have to bring awareness to where their body is in space. And there's definitely misconceptions related with that as well, where it's like, oh, they don't understand personal space because they're, right
mhm,
up in my face. Or they're looking at the corner and I'm saying their name repeatedly and they're not turning and looking at me because they don't understand their name or want to turn and look at you, that's because it requires them to have control to turn their bodies and look up at you. So it is, I totally understand, because it's easy to go off on a million different tangents
Mm,
with this, because there is so much to unpack about it.
mm,
So I
yeah,
totally understand that.
and I would imagine that sorry, were you gonna say something?
No, go ahead.
I would imagine that spelling really it's like practice for other motor planning skills, like, that probably helps them in a lot of other places in life.
Yeah.
Um, but go ahead and tell us about sort of the progression through the different methods.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we start out with they're called three board stencils, and it is the alphabet split into threes. So you imagine like a typical stencil with large letters. You have, A through I, etc., and then split into threes. And so they're larger targets, and we would have the individual, usually they will poke through with a pencil. So they will hold a pencil and they will poke through the stencil to the letter that they want. When we start out, we're just asking questions based on what we've read to them. So I read about flamingos and then I say, what animal are we talking about? And they spell flamingo. They don't have all of those letters on one board yet. So we have to know where they're going so that we can put the correct board with the correct letter in front of them. From there, we move on to a stencil board that has all 26 letters in one spot. Obviously, much more to scan. The apraxia, that global apraxia that I'm talking about, it also affects the eyes. So we call that ocular motor apraxia. These individuals may have 20/20 vision. It's not that their visual acuity is affected, it's that they do not have control over the muscles of their eyes to move the way they want them to scan the way that we do. It's really challenging. So that's part of the reason we start with those 3-letter boards where the letters are a lot bigger and they only have to scan 7 or 8 of them at a time. We move to that 26 board. They get consistent with that. We're fading back our support. And then we move on to what we call a laminated letter board, which I think in most videos, like if you YouTube spellers, the laminated letter board is probably what you're going to see in most instances. So that's where they're just touching with their pointer, pointing to the letters. And then from there, we move on to a keyboard. So there's also a hierarchy of questions that go along with that and prompting to try to increase from more concrete facts. We're talking about flamingos to more open-ended communication, which is what everybody wants, but it's a very, very methodical process to get them there. And I will say, as far as support, the most level of support that we provide in spelling to communicate is pointing right to the letter for them. Like, this is early on, okay? We're talking about flamingos. Which letter, which animal are we talking about? I might point directly to the F, okay? And people are, but you're showing them where to go. Yes, we have to teach them the skill. We have to show them this is where your eyes go. This is how you move your arm to poke through. With time, we fade back all of that visual prompting. But I say that to point out in spelling to communicate, there is not physical touch. So that's a common misconception people, I think, and depending on the different types of method that you use. And it's not to discount individuals who use facilitated communication. I absolutely stand behind them as well. I appreciate spelling to communicate because it leaves less room for doubt, in my opinion, as they become more independent. But I always just throw that out there because I know people have some preconceived notions.
Yeah, and it sounds like in the beginning you were asking questions with one answer. It's
Exactly.
not like there's no room for you to manipulate
Correct. Yep.
their thoughts or what they're saying because there's only one correct answer.
Yep. It's
Okay.
just like in regular speech therapy. If we're like, where does the animal live? It lives on the farm. And then we say
Mhm.
it and then the kid says it. I mean, that is essentially the same thing. I'm showing them with a maximum level of support and then fading it. But yeah, we don't get into personal thoughts and opinions and that sort of thing until we're on the 26 board. First of all, we have to have all 26 letters for them to be able to spell their
Mhm.
thoughts, but also the prompting just has to be faded back at that point, of course.
Yeah. We're gonna pause here the recording for just a sec because I realized we're on the wrong microphones. Sorry, can you hear
No,
me?
I'm so sorry. I thought you were maybe talking to her and then I was like,
No,
wait.
I forgot to unmute the mic. So is spelling to communicate a good fit for everyone with unreliable speech? Are there use cases where it might not be? And how do you evaluate when someone might be ready to start spelling?
Great question. So typically we start spelling around the age of 5 is when we would start that process. It doesn't mean that you can't work on those kind of prerequisite skills, if you will. Hand-eye coordination is a big one before the age of 5. And there are ways to expose to information and just make sure that we're always feeding the brain is what we call that, just giving them age-appropriate information still, even if they can't show that they understand. But we typically start on the boards around the age of 5. That looks very different than starting on the boards with somebody that is 20 years old because we are obviously much more active bodies. But
So can
yeah,
I interrupt you for just a
yeah,
second? When you have an older person
mm,
who can spell,
yeah.
do they come in typically knowing how to read? Have they taught themselves to read?
The 5-year-olds have also taught themselves to read.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they do. That's kind of a misconception as well, especially when we start with littles, that we are teaching them how to spell. And the truth of the matter is we are not teaching them how to spell. They come in with us presuming that they already know because they've been exposed, most kids have been exposed to literacy over and over through whether that's listening to Sesame Street, watching other shows, listening to songs that are played that have literacy in them. A lot of these kiddos can't play with toys in the way that typical kids play with toys because they don't have the motor skills to do so. What's always around them? Text. These are master observers. So I think that is one of the, mysteries, if you will, is like, well, how does a 5-year-old, if it's a bigger word or a more novel word, I'm not going to spell cat for a 5-year-old. I fully believe that they know how to spell that. But if we come in and do a lesson on flamingos, I might say Flamingos. And I say that to them and then read my little paragraph. And then I say, what animal are we talking about? I fully expect I just told them how to spell that word, that they've retained that information. Their memories, I think, are just, it's hard, I think, for us to wrap our minds around, but the level that they're processing information and taking in their environment is so very different from speakers that we work under that assumption that they do already know how to spell. And if they're 20, they're spelling at a college level. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
I have no doubt in that. And that has been proven over and over again. So it isn't that we're teaching those literacy skills. It's that we work under the presumption that they've been exposed to literacy. And because they've been exposed to literacy, we assume that they can both read and spell. Of course, those go together.
Mhm. Gotcha. So back to bleh. So you said around 5.
Yes.
Are there any like sort of physical or external signs that you look for that
Mhm.
it might be a good time to start?
Yes. So, as far as physically, what we are going to need is mobility of the arm. It could be the right arm or the left arm. We have both. We work from the shoulder. So, it's a gross motor movement. They need to move their entire arm, which is going to be easier than a fine motor movement coming from the fingers or the wrist. So, with that, that's really the only physical, even then, if mobility is challenging, that's something we can still work on. So, I don't even want to say, obviously, if there was, paralysis going on, that would be a major challenge. But other than that, you work a muscle over and over and over again. You build the muscle and you build the motor plan. Do they need to be able to sit? Absolutely not. I chase kids around all day doing this. And sometimes I'm running with them and they poke one letter and then they run across the room and they poke another letter. And then, we just go with the flow with that. So as far as physically, we just need some arm movement. That's what I would say for that.
So there's within MCHS, there's a very wide range of sort of capabilities because
Sure.
there's so much variance within the disorder.
Uh-huh.
There's some people that use eye tracking, like, I think the big one is the Tobii Dynavox.
Mhm.
Have you ever worked with devices like that for spelling? Is that something that's possible?
I have not. There is currently research going on that integrates that, which is pretty cool. But the issue challenge, I should say, with the eye tracking devices is that ocular motor apraxia that we talked about. So a lot of times they just haven't developed the eye muscle movement intentionality to be able to stare and maintain their gaze to select that letter, and so it hasn't been something yet that I have worked with, but certainly once we've built that foundation of, okay, now my eyes can get to a letter and I can sustain my gaze, that's how they're doing that research
Mhm,
with the eye gaze at that point, but not
gotcha.
much experience personally, no.
Alright.
To say
Yeah,
too,
go ahead.
about, kind of, well, what are we looking for to get started?
Mhm,
This is one of the biggest, I think, challenges in spelling to communicate is you do not get immediate proof or validation that your kiddo understands what's being told to them because of the level of prompting. So a lot of times, especially if I have a young one that comes in, a 5-year-old, we usually have to point right to the letter, and sometimes even with us pointing right to the letter and saying, okay, poke it, get it, move your arm, they still cannot get to the target letter because of those motor challenges. And so with time, and I've had the pleasure of having this experience with probably close to 40 young kids now that could not even get to the correct letter with maximum level of prompting, who have now shown that they can do it. They've built those motor skills. But there is a leap of faith that is involved with this. That is the hardest thing, I think, in getting started. It is a barrier because you're not going to get immediate proof or validation, but you will see progress. It is absolutely a marathon, but if you stick with it, the more that you practice any motor plan, your body does it over and over and over again, like riding a bike, it will become automatic. And so, with that, people will say, well, does my kid need to be able to identify letters? They are identifying letters. They just can't show you that they are identifying letters. So, people will try to kind of quote unquote test their kid. Oh, show me the A. And they're holding two pictures. And when their kid can't do it, they're like, there's no way they're going to be able to spell. They can't even show me what an A is. But what does that require? If I put an A and a B in front of you, what motor skills does that require? You have to move your eyes to both of them. You have to scan, then you have to lock your eyes in on one, and then you need the hand-eye coordination to initiate the arm movement to pick the one that your eyes are on. And that whole time you have to sustain your gaze. If you haven't been taught those motor skills, you're very likely to hit one of the cards impulsively and then walk away, which is what most kids do. I always want to point that out because there is no prerequisite that we are looking for to prove that they understand their letters or they know how to read or anything like that. They can't prove it because they've never been taught the skills to be able to show us. So that's that leap of faith where, if you can get through the first couple of months of practice, you're gonna see things start to click. And then, obviously the payoff is huge. I don't have one parent that won't tell you it wasn't worth going through the amount of work that it was.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's been eye-opening with Leo's whole journey is, like, and this gets kind of metaphysical if you really think about it, but, like, in order to express a thought in any way, it requires some physical, like, you don't think
Yes.
of speech as, like, a motor process, you don't think of it involving muscles, but
Yep.
it does, you
Yep.
know what I mean? So, it's just sort of the boundaries of where the mind ends and the body's begins gets really, sort of muddy. Go ahead,
It
sorry.
does. And I always give people this example because I think it kind of ties exactly what you're saying together. It's like if I put a piece of tape over your mouth and then I tape your arms to the chair and then I say, hey, do you know your alphabet? You're gonna look at me like I'm crazy and I'm gonna say, prove it. You're gonna try to move your mouth but your mouth isn't going to be able to move the way you want it to. You're like, oh, well, I'll use gestures. Okay, guess what? Your arms also aren't going to move the way that you want them to. I'll write it. I'll use sign language. So many people, oh, well, I'll just teach them sign language. Sign language requires an immense amount of motor control. And so you're sitting there and you're screaming the alphabet in your head, but nobody can read your mind. And so not only are you frustrated because you can't get that out, then you have people who are like, you can't prove it to me, so you must not know it. And it's like, okay, I think that kind of puts into perspective why we have to take that leap of faith and you have to presume competence. That is something you'll see if you look up spelled communication, presume competence over and over and over again. It means simply, if they've been around it, if they've heard it, if they've heard the information, they do understand it, and they shouldn't have to prove that they understand to be taught at an age appropriate level or to have access to communication, of course. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very good point.
And to complicate things more, not only can they not do what they want, they can't stop what they don't want. So,
Yes.
like Leo, we try the sign language thing, and this is more,
Mhm.
and this is all done. Well, this is his stem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, is this him stemming, or is it the closest approximation he can get to more, or all
Yeah.
done? So
Yeah.
that's really complicated. And then the other thing, talking about that leap of faith. So if people just sort of do like a cost benefit on this.
Mhm.
Let's say that you try this and it doesn't work. Your child, for whatever reason, isn't capable of it. The risk is lost time and lost money.
Sure.
If you don't try this, and everybody should do what's best for them. I don't want to shame anybody, but
Sure.
if you don't do this, uh, your child is potentially missing out on being able to communicate to the fullest possible degree. So, to me, like, as soon as Leo's capable, we're gonna figure out a way to start him with this, just because to me it's worth possibly wasting some time and money to at least see if this is possible. So, again, like I said, I don't wanna make it like, make anybody feel guilty because they're not trying to teach their kid to spell, because everybody's got their own unique challenges and things, and you may just have to just get to a point in life or with other issues that they may have that you can take on this new thing. But I think that it's worth exploring at the very least.
When I took the course, that was one of my questions because just coming from an SLP background, we're very much taught how to assess, and that's part of the process. And so that was one of my questions. Well, what is needed? How do we determine whether this is going to be a good fit for an individual? And when they told me, well, you got to just give it a go. You have to see if those motor plans are going to build. That was a hard pill for me to swallow. And I said, have you ever done this? And this is from the headquarters in Virginia, where they've worked with thousands of spellers. I said, have you ever done this and gotten to the point where you found out it actually was a true cognitive intellectual disability? And they said, not yet. And full transparency, I did not believe them. I was like, there is no way that's possible. I just finished a degree learning about all of these different developmental intellectual disorders, and that doesn't make any sense. And now I haven't worked with thousands of spellers. I've worked with well over 100 at this point, though, and I will tell you, every single one has made progress. Not all of them are to open communication yet, which is what we say when they're able to freely express their thoughts and opinions, but every single one has made progress. So I think it is, even though it's a marathon, you see the progress, and that keeps people going. And regulation, they're often so much less frustrated when you have somebody who's saying, listen, I know you're in there, I know you understand, I'm gonna help you to get it out, versus being taught their colors 4 million times. So
Yeah. So the majority, just sort of because of the nature of um genetic testing and where we're
uh-huh.
at right now, they think that the actual rate of people with some sort of MCHS, or excuse me, some sort of MEF2C variation is 1 in 30,000. But
Mm.
right now there's only I think 406 was the latest number, somewhere between 4 and 500 cases of this in the world, and the majority of them are relatively young children under 5 because, again, it's only fairly recently that genetic
Sure.
testing has become so widespread. What advice planning ahead for them to be able to spell? You've already talked about being exposed to literacy, and almost universally, the kids in our community love super simple songs and Miss Rachel, so things like that, they're already getting
Oh,
exposed. But what other things could people be doing to sort of prepare and be ready for when that time comes?
yes. So I highly recommend starting to look at hand-eye coordination in general. So to use any type of alternative communication, you have to be able to get your eyes to a target and your hand to follow through. And so that could be as simple as rolling a ball back and forth. That could be looking at books and having them starting to work on pointing is a great skill. Even if you have to hold their little finger, give it some squeezes so they can feel their finger in space and then touch, okay, let's touch the apple. And you really have to pay attention. Like they might be able to point to it, but if you look at their eyes are like up on the ceiling. So their hand is moving towards it, but their eyes are not working with their hands at all. I always say, especially the little, hands and eyes work together. Hands and eyes work together. We have to remember that because everything that we do, if I say, hey, will you open that door? What's the first thing you're gonna do? You're going to turn and you're going to get your eyes on the door. We know that that is a challenging skill for individuals with apraxia. But if we start to coach their eyes in that really simplified, you're going to tell them the direction that you want them to move your eyes. So if the door is over to the left, and yes, I would introduce left and right prior to the age of 5. I know typical 5-year-olds would really struggle with that, but I would start with left and right and up and down. So move your eyes. You could say over. Okay, move your eyes over, 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 or move your eyes up. Get your eyes down, that sort of thing. That's going to help that hand-eye coordination. And they're going to be able to they're going to be able to engage with alternative communication, but it's also going to help so much in them just following directions. If you want your kid to go pick up the cup off of the counter, again, what's the first thing they need to do? They need to get their eyes on the target. And so if you can see where their eyes are and kind of bring them to where they need to. You might need to like provide like almost a visual, like, hey, look at me, look over here, and like kind of move if they're really little so that they can get their eyes over to where that cup is. But once they can get their eyes there, then it's like, okay, move your feet, keep going. And so we do a lot of what we call body coaching, where because we know that this is a motor disorder, we are telling their body exactly what their body needs to do. So instead of saying, get the red cup, the red cup, the red cup over and over, we start saying, okay, move your eyes down. Okay, move your feet, reach your arm forward. We start talking specifically to the body, and that makes a huge difference in following directions. So those things will help, with those receptive tasks. What are measured as receptive tasks, we know that they understand, but it will also be a very, very good prep for potential alternative communication, including spelling down the line.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, Andrew's obviously an adult, Andrew Simmons, but
Yeah.
his mom told us that it helps to tell him what specific muscle groups to use.
Mm-hmm.
Like, pick up this cup, and he wouldn't do it, and she said, "Use your bicep," and then all of a sudden, he's like,
Yes.
"Here's the cup."
Yeah.
But so would that advice be fundamentally different for anyone who's older? Because there are several adults in the community.
Yes. I wouldn't say that it would be fundamentally different. We do body coaching through every age, all ages.
Uh-huh.
But it could be more specific, like you said, like the move your bicep, or sometimes, it's kind of playing around with what prompt their body is going to respond to. So I might say move your arm and their arm doesn't move, but I say, move your shoulder and then they'll move their arm. It's kind of some trial and error and individualization with that. But no, exposing especially the older guys, put on a podcast that you think there's no way they're going to understand this. That's the podcast I want you to put on for those guys. They crave cognitive stimulation so much because their brains are machines, first of all, but also they've a lot of times they haven't been given the education that they wanted and deserved. So even just putting something on in the background like that, I've seen and heard stories of people who are so dysregulated, spellers, non-speakers, that so angry, and just getting somebody to presume competence, somebody to say, I know you're in there, and then putting on a podcast about black holes or whatever that I certainly do not understand most of what's going on, but that will regulate them because they have this cognitive stimulation in their brain where a lot of times they're just kind of roaming around, or their body is just acting on impulses, or their body is watching kid shows over and over again and they're like totally sick of that, but it's what their body is used to. So they just keep opening they keep typing in the same video or opening the same app because that's the motor plan their body learned. But even if you can't get started right away on the letterboards, please provide something anybody their age would want to listen to. Audiobooks, podcasts, those are fantastic and free in cases you can find those resources for them.
Yeah, and I think it's important to draw the parallels between these autistic people and quote unquote typical people, because like I normally have to listen to podcasts or music or something when I do work too. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
just sitting here typing on a computer all day would be really boring, or listening to Sesame Street all day would about drive you nuts.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And there's plenty of times, you know, people with MCHS or autism will perseverate on things where they'll just like get fixed. There's plenty of times where I walk by the TV and there's something that I don't want to be watching on, and I'll stand there for 5 minutes and watch it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I just think it's important to show that like these issues, they may be magnified in certain people, but they're issues that everybody deals with. And so they're not as different as you think.
Yes.
Can you talk about the importance of spelling partners and sort of the relationship between spelling partners and the person spelling?
Absolutely. So I will preface with saying this is very nuanced, but a lot of people initially, well, why do you hold the letterboard? So as we get started, and sometimes forever, the individual needs the communication partner, that's who they're working with, to hold the letterboard. And the reason for that, from a motor standpoint, is because all they have to do is reach their arm out. That is it. It's the most simplified motor plan that you can have is just reaching forward. They don't have to reach up. They don't have to reach down, just straight ahead. Usually that is lower than what a desk or a table would be in front of them. Because then I have people, well, like, why can't I put it up on a stand? You can, but when we are building a motor plan, consistency is key. And so if I put it up on a stand, that requires the individual to stay in the exact same spot, which for older guys, sometimes they could do that. For littles, they almost can never do that. So every time I place the letterboard in front of them, we are putting it in a very specific spot over and over and over to simplify that motor plan. Over time, I have several right now that are working on a keyboard up on a stand on the desk. So it is a level of independence that a lot of them want and they want to work for, and it's really hard, but they are capable of that. Of course, there's nothing I wouldn't say they're capable of, but that is, so in the beginning, from a motor standpoint, we're holding the board because it's the easiest motor plan. Beyond that, there is more, because there is a level of trust that has to build between the speller and the communication partner. And so I'm saying communication partner, but actually the title is CRP, and the R is regulation, communication and regulation partner. So a CRP is the regulation is arguably more important than anything else, because these individuals have, in most cases, been severely underestimated. They've been doing tasks a lot of times in school where they are like pressured into, if they don't get the right answer, then, oh, you're getting an X, or you're going to have to do this 10 more times if you don't get the right answer. And so there is a little bit, I think, of trauma, honestly, involved in getting the quote unquote correct answer when you don't have control over your body. So most cases, when I sit down with somebody, I can almost feel the speller's anxiety immediately, because it's like, oh, I'm about to be tested just like I have my entire life or whatever. One of the first things I say to them is, I'm not asking you, even though they could be read as comprehension questions, because I'm reading to you and then asking you a question. I am absolutely not asking you this question so that you can prove that you understood, because I already know that you did understand. Just that alone is, I think, a huge weight off of their shoulders. It is much more difficult for people who haven't had the experience. I have had the immense pleasure of working with so many individuals that in the beginning, I kind of had to fake it until I make it. Like, do they understand? Like, okay, yes, I believe in you, and I did, but once you have that in front of your face so many times, you do just become so confident in their ability. And so when I have somebody new walk in, it's not even a question. I 1000% believe that they understand and that they can spell, and they can feel that from me. They can feel that confidence. They can feel that I am not going to judge them if they poke a wrong letter. They can just, that's why I say it's very nuanced, like that level of trust and comfort. It's being a communication partner truly is a skill. Anybody who has been trained in it will tell you. So like practitioner, so technically I am a practitioner, those are the people who go through the whole training, right? That's like a 6 to 7 month program. But you can be a CRP with your own child, right? And so that's part of what we do is, yeah, the speller works with us, but we teach the parent how to be a communication partner with them. And so parents, a lot of times if you have older spellers too, you've been told your entire life something specific about their intellect and their cognitive ability. So even though you want to believe that they got it, sometimes, understandably, there's just a little bit of doubt in the back of your mind. And I think most people will say if you have a non-speaker, they're incredibly perceptive. They pick up on the emotions. So just that little difference, they might do better with me. They might be more accurate and more regulated with me. But when the parent immediately steps to work with them, they might have a little bit more of a challenge initially. But we work through that, and then they become co-regulation for each other. So that's something we work with the parents a lot on, but it is just something that I think it's a piece of the puzzle of why it's a marathon and not a sprint, because you can't build trust in one session. Even with all of the experience that I've had and the confidence that I come in with my spellers, I can't sit down and, oh, they're open in one session. It doesn't work like that. You have to build that trust and partnership together. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
I think for parents, it might not even, and again, excuse me, Leo is only 2.5, so
Yeah.
I can only speak to this so much, but I don't even think it's necessarily doubt as it is just like you're afraid of getting your hopes up that this might work,
Yes.
because then if it doesn't, it's so disappointing.
Yes.
But I mean, if it doesn't work, then you're just the same place you are right now, right? So, I mean, fundamentally, there's really nothing to lose. So, um, let's see what I had next here. So what are sort of the common hangups, issues, like challenges you see when learning to spell, and sort of how do you navigate those?
Yeah. So I think that the major the major challenge is usually just regulation, depending on, and don't get me wrong, we have guys that come in. I do have a few girl spellers, but they are majorly guys. So I do have some that can sit and be regulated, seemingly regulated through the whole session. Their body is calm. They don't have impulsive actions that seem to be stopping them. We do have those guys and they do great. We also have other guys that do great that cannot regulate as well. And so they are impulsively grabbing things. I had a guy who would come in and take every single thing off the wall when he came in, or they need to go through their body. I should say their body, because it's not that their mind wants to do this. In fact, he had communicated several times he did not want to do that. But their body feels the urge to take out every single toy and sort them, right? Or these other things that we're working against where we're trying to fight against the impulse so that they can be intentional in their motor planning. And so sometimes when we're doing that, just like us, when we are doing something that is really challenging, there is going to be some level of resistance from the body at points. They don't want to communicate because they do. But hey, like, you're asking me to do something that's really, really challenging. And this is especially true for littles. So, below the age of 8, there are sessions where they are crying and they're trying their best. They're trying to push through, but we're just asking them to do something that is brand new to them. They have never had to use their eye muscles or their arm muscles in this way. And so just like with any other kid, yeah, we pretty much expect that there are gonna be some rough sessions. But once we can build that relationship with them and they trust that we're not going to throw in the towel as soon as they hit the wrong letter, they can calm down, they can start to regulate themselves. And that's typical kids too. That learning regulation skills is so challenging. And then you throw sensory motor challenges on top of it. And yeah, it's a little bit of an uphill battle for those kids. But I do think that presuming competence is everything to them. I mean, they feel that. And on the other end of the spectrum, the older guys are like, oh my gosh, I've gone my entire life with people talking to me like I was a toddler, and now you're talking to me like I understand you. So that goes very far with regulation, and I would say that's the biggest hurdle that we typically encounter.
Yeah, and it's kind of the reflection of the thing I mentioned earlier with the parents. We've talked to different people who have positive and negative experiences with ABA,
Yes.
but a lot of, and this isn't my opinion of ABA, but
Mhm.
a lot of spellers who speak about their experience with ABA say that it was traumatic. And you were talking about, they're faced with this task that's just impossible in the sense that like they just can't control their bodies to do it.
Yeah.
And then, if they don't get it, then they get the X, they can't move on to the thing. They're 12 and they can't learn math yet because they don't know how to tie their shoes. And it's like, well,
Yes.
what does one thing have to do with the other? And this isn't necessarily a case with all ABA practitioners. So, and then if you consider that, and then they're given this opportunity to be able to communicate at the fullest sort of breadth possible for their situation, it would be incredibly like nerve wracking that like, oh my God, if I screw this, like I have a chance to finally have a voice. And if I screw this up, it could go away. That would be terrifying. So that, and along with them not being able to control their body when they're in emotional states, that makes that apraxia worse. So, just what you said, that's why it's so important to have that trust that you will not just be like, okay, well, I guess that's that, and then move on.
Yes, absolutely. It's so much, I think, pressure. I mean, and I've had spellers say that once they're getting, it's too much pressure. The question sometimes when they're earlier on what we would call emerging open, they're just starting to get some stuff out. And then, the parent's like, okay, I have 1,000 questions
Mhm.
prepared for you. And the seller's like, it's too much pressure. Like so I think you're dead on with that. And it's part of the reason that we don't have the research that we need for this as well, because they take, the non-speaker, the speller into a room and they're like, you're going to be tested, and if you get this wrong, then we're going to say that anything you ever communicated it wasn't you, it wasn't valid. And it's like, oh my gosh, can you imagine the amount of pressure related to that? So yeah, I do think that ABA, it can have a little bit of I need to get the correct answer, but it's really hard for me to, and then it creates a whole thing of, of anxiety. And that's
Mhm.
something I've been talking about with my parents recently, because every non-speaker, if you are a non-speaker, you have experienced trauma because you have not been able to communicate. That is just bottom line. And so when you've been through trauma, you are going to have anxiety. So that ties into that dysregulation that, yeah, I think it's very technician based. There are certainly ABA therapists out there who have the kindest heart in the world, and I have spellers who, the family say ABA helped them exponentially. I think it's a different lens of looking through things, right? Like from an ABA perspective, it's the reason they're not doing this or the reason they are doing this is because of a behavior that's intentional. And that's where it, like, because people will say, well, everything is behavior. Yes, that is correct. Everything is behavior, but not all behavior is intentional. And that's where we get into, all communication, all behavior is communication is a big, phrase right now. And I totally understand why that is, because it's like, look at what they're doing. Even though they can't speak, they're still communicating. But we have to be very careful with that because we are assigning intention to things that very well could not be intentional. And so there's a lot of gray area
Mhm.
in there,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. So, I can't remember, did we schedule this for an hour or an hour and a half? Are you doing okay on time?
I'm good. Yep.
Okay. I don't think we ever actually explained what the controversy around
Yes.
not just the specific school of spelling to communicate, but, there are other ones, RPM, rapid prompting method,
Yes.
and facilitated communication in particular is rather controversial. So, can you first explain what that controversy is and then sort of how you navigate it, particularly if you're dealing with, like, a school or a therapist or a doctor who is not receptive to these methods of communication?
Sure. Yes. So the controversy is truly a lack of information, in my opinion. Like I had said, I took the course to gain the information and make the determination for myself. When we're looking at evidence-based practice, which is what you will see come up if you start to really research this, there are three parts of that. There is research, which is important, but there is also professional or clinical experience, and there is family and client preferences. So there are three pillars to that. And research tends to be the hyper focus of skeptics. And what I will say, there are two recent research studies that do support spelled communication. One has to do with eye tracking, and that came out a few years ago, and the other has to do with literacy in non-speaking individuals, and that just came out last year. So there is research to support it, but not enough to satisfy ASHA, which is the American Speech and Language Hearing Association, which governs SLPs. So that's the National Association. And they have put out a statement that says that they do not recommend any form of spelled communication. I believe that it started with just facilitated communication, which does involve physical touch. Okay. And so I am not trained in facilitated communication. So I will not speak too much on that.
Yeah.
I fully
So
support individuals who use it. I do not, I do not doubt them, of
mhm,
course, in my line of work. I think from a more objective standpoint, it's just harder to verify. And so the statement broadened then to include all forms of spelling, including S2C and RPM. And it's a challenge, I won't lie to you. I've read the statement so many times. It was a big part of the reason I almost didn't take the course, was reading the statement made me sick to my stomach. And then as I was going through the course, I kept going back and reading it again because I just wanted to get both sides. I wanted to make sure I was really understanding all perspectives in this. But everything, even down to like the neurology, which I won't get into, but the neurology of apraxia and understanding that as it relates to speech and language, all of that I learned in my spelling to communicate training made infinitely more sense as it pertains to non-speakers and minimally speaking individuals than anything that I learned in graduate school. And so SLPs especially, I am one of a handful of SLPs that are trained in spelling to communicate. I work very closely with an occupational therapist here who's trained in spelling to communicate, and we have families. We have families who work with. We have a sibling who's trained in spelling to communicate. No formal education. I mean, her education's in marketing. So, there is a broad range of people who can become spelling to communicate practitioners. And it's because of Ash's statement, there just are not many SLPs. And because of that, the school is getting it into schools is a whole other can of worms. But I will say that just this year, we had 2 contracts with schools in the area. One was a public school, which I'm very excited about. And that little boy has a one-on-one aide who works with him on the letterboards in the school. He's quite amazing. And there's another specialized school in the area that is also using the letterboard. So it is a slow process. Typically, the speller, I hate that they have to advocate this hard for themselves, to be honest, but we typically do not go into a school saying we want this form of communication until we have faded all of our prompting and they are openly communicating. Then we can sit in an IEP meeting and the speller can tell them what they think. So but sometimes that takes years. I mean, like I have a few that are really getting gung-ho right now about going to their school and sharing this, because it's just becoming really frustrating for them at this point. And they've been spelling over 3 years. So it's been quite a process for them to get it into the school. So I do think the tides are turning with that, but it is still a bit of an uphill battle. And I think the only reason, to be honest, that we've been able to get into 2 schools at this point is because there's a bit of credibility behind my licensing. So I think that's opened some doors where others may have been shut a little bit faster.
yeah, and a lot of SLPs, from what I understand, regardless of what their personal opinions are on spelling, may choose not to pursue that because
Yeah,
they could face professional repercussions
sure.
for doing so.
Yes.
So that's another thing that complicates things. I had something else. And you talked about research,
Yes.
and I think it's important. People who may not be familiar with science sort of have this thing of like, well, we have this question and we'll go to science about it and we'll figure it out. And as we said earlier, like there's no way to measure somebody's thoughts without physical outputs. And we
Exactly.
don't have the technology right now to actually be able to research whether spelling is what they're actually thinking or not.
Yeah.
Now, you can kind of use deductive reasoning, and to me, it seems pretty obvious that it is. But like sometimes we just don't have the technology to study things adequately. So hopefully, as the years go by and technology advances, new things will come out that allow us to study that better.
Absolutely. I think that that is on the horizon. In fact, I know that it is. And I encourage families truly. I think one of the best things that you can do if you are listening to this and you're like, I'm not sure. I get it. I was also so sat with that perspective for a while. Go watch a session.
Mhm.
Go observe somewhere. I mean, I know a lot of it depends on where you are, where your nearest practitioner is going to be. But a lot of these spellers who are open, they will absolutely say anybody who wants to come and watch, come watch, because I want to advocate for those that are not at this point yet. Once you see it in front of your face, I it does tend to shift things if you don't let the but that's not going to be my child
Mhm.
perspective creep in there if you just fully believe, because that's what you have to know is those parents that have that open-ended speller, they also thought that at one point, most of them, like, oh, it's not going to be mine, but it is something seen in person changes for sure.
Right, sure. That kind of moves nicely into my next sort of section here. So, Haley and I this week watched the documentary Spellers on YouTube,
Yes.
which is free to watch for anybody. I recommend everybody go watch it. Are there any other books, movies, podcasts, whatever that you think are good examples of spelling that you would encourage people to check out?
Yes. So most of my families got to me by reading the book Underestimated by JB and Jamie Handley. A father and son is the speller. They
Mhm.
co-wrote the book, and I think it just resonates deeply because he was one of those parents that said definitely is not going to be my son.
Mhm.
And spoiler alert, was very proven wrong by that. And that's where the Spellers documentary
Yes,
kind
they're in
of
the documentary as well.
spawned from, which is, yeah, on YouTube. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
free on YouTube. You can just look up Spellers documentary and watch it. It's about an hour and a half. And I always tell parents, let your child, adult, let your non-speaker listen to it as well. I do not
Mhm.
care if they sit there. Most of non-speakers are not going to be able to sit and attend to that screen visually for an hour and a half, but just play it while they're in the house or in the other room. They will hear it. I think it's important for them to hear what's going on there too, but that's a great introduction. Keep in mind, if you watch the Spellers documentary, that what you are looking at is the end product of spelling. That is probably years for most people. That's one of my number one questions. Well, how long does it take? Well, for a little. So I'm going to say, for this below the age of 10,
Mhm.
I'd say you're looking at probably 2 years of very consistent practice, once a week with a practitioner and then several times a week at home, even if it's just 10 minutes. I mean, I don't want that to be daunting for parents. You can start with 10 minutes a few times a week. That will help a lot. Probably 2 years. For our older guys, just depending on what their motor profile looks like, probably closer 12 to 18 months is going to be
So,
average.
2 years to be using a keyboard or 2 years to be spelling period?
Great question. Sorry. 2 years to get to the point of open communication, meaning I can ask personal thoughts, feelings, opinions. They'll be spelling that whole time because we'll be spelling things that are known based on what I'm reading and into semi open. Like I said, there's a whole hierarchy for questions like that. But to get to the point where you can say, hey, what do you want for your birthday? Or, what do you want for Christmas? Or did you want to go to the park or did you want to go to the theater today? Or, whatever you're asking them, the questions that everybody comes in and wants to ask. It's a marathon to get to that point. So I always tell people, because if you just watch that movie without context, you're like, oh, cool. You can just put a letterboard in front of them and they can spell their thoughts. If you try, it looks deceivingly easy. I promise if you ever get trained as a communication partner, you are going to so quickly say, oh, wow, this is a lot, because there is a lot going behind the scenes that you just cannot see from the surface. It takes an immense amount of effort, and it is a marathon, like I said. So I was just saying something before that and I lost my train of thought on it. All right, it might come back to me.
We
There's
can
only a
always
million
circle
a
back and
million things
edit
that are
it in.
related to this, guys, huh?
So I'm gonna have to kind of ramble here for a minute to make my next point. So something that's really popularized spelling sort of in the culture as a whole lately has been the podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, which for people who haven't heard it, it sort of focuses on a lot of people who have experiences with non-speakers, parents or teachers or stuff. They feel that those kids can read their mind, that they have some sort of connection that can't currently be quantified. And it sort of gets into some spiritual, mystical stuff. So my question isn't actually directly about that sort of end of things. I think the telepathy tapes are really great that it's putting spelling out there and sort of saying, why is this not accepted?
Mhm.
My concern with it is that people will presume that every non-speaker is some sort of psychic. An experience that we have a lot is, someone will meet Leo and we're not even going to try to explain the whole genetic diagnosis. So we'll say he's autistic and they're like, oh, he's going to be so smart someday. And it's like, well, yes, he's very smart, but that doesn't make up for all the other challenges and things that, and people have this conceptualization about autism in general that it's more like, and I know this is an outdated term, but Asperger's. Like you're
Sure.
just going to be
Yep.
really intelligent and quirky and socially awkward, and that doesn't even begin to cover the whole
Yes.
spectrum. Yes, thank you. So my question is, are there any misconceptions like I talked about with sort of the telepathy thing and non-speakers that you see that concern you or anything like that?
That's a good question. The telepathy tapes, that has been very controversial in
Mhm,
the
mhm,
spelling world. And because you have the side of where people are saying that, they shouldn't have to hide this, they should be able to be vocal about it, and you have others who recognize that it could be adding fuel to the fire for skeptics. It's already something that is widely accepted, and so we start throwing the ability to read minds in there, and it could discredit inadvertently, absolutely. But I think there is fear surrounding the fact that it could inadvertently discredit the voices of those who spell. So, personally, I there's not really anything that would I don't think shock me at this point, or something that I fully wouldn't believe, because I just recognize that we don't know what we don't know, truly. So I certainly believe the spellers who are communicating that, but I agree with you that it could get into like, oh well, now, and it's almost something like, sometimes I think it also feels like something to marvel at as well. Like, oh wow, like
mhm,
they have, they can contribute to society now because they have these psychic abilities. And it's like, well, they already could, were functioning,
mhm,
great members of society, contributing and capable and all of those things. So I hate to see that, but I also, at the same time, I'm going to be honest, I also understand the fascination with it because it
mhm,
is fascinating. I think that in terms of, huge misconceptions, I think one thing that kind of stands out, other than, obviously just the assumption that there's a lack of intelligence, is the lack of empathy or feelings that autistics sometimes are assumed to have. So, oh, they don't understand like when they hit that hurts somebody, or even like parallel to social appropriateness. Like, we don't do that. We need to use nice hands, or you don't pull your pants down in the middle of Walmart, like they understand that. And I think that it's one of those things where the mind and the body are so disconnected. Caden, who I talked about earlier, he calls his body Gus. So his name is Caden, his body's name is Gus, and he will call Gus out. Caden's 18 now, so he is an adult, and sometimes he does use some expletives and calling Gus out. Because I mean, and I've known Caden since he was 7. We have an amazing relationship. Sometimes when I put the board in front of him, Gus will hit the board out of my hand with so much force that it almost knocks me over sometimes. He's very strong. And then Caden will say something along the lines of like, I'm sorry, Gus is being so uncooperative today. Okay. Or like eloping is another thing I could talk about too, where his body, a lot of times, Gus will run towards the main road and it scares the heck out of him. He does not want to be running towards the main road. And so, like, what a lot of people are like, we can't, what would they say? We can't go towards the main road. There's cars there. You could get hit. You could get hurt. And they try to explain this to him when in his mind, he's like, I completely understand that I should not be running towards the road and it scares me. Just do not have enough control over my impulsive body to stop myself from doing that. So I think, even sometimes people are like, oh yeah, they're super smart. But then, they're explaining things like, oh, you can't run towards the road, or they hit something out of their hands and they're like, nice hands or whatever. I think it's just those further reaching implications. Like, yeah, they're smart and they understand everything. But they are, like you had touched on earlier, they are more alike from us than different. When I tell you I talk to my spellers exactly how I'm talking to you, that is not an exaggeration. I think the way we speak to them is so important. And, I have, and my family might laugh if they listen to this, I have a family of a 15-year-old who, it's so ingrained in them to say when they come in, they say, do you have to go potty? And I keep telling them, I'm like, would we say now, and their son is open and he is brilliant. I mean, spelling words that we are just like mouth agape over. And I keep telling them I love them so dearly. I'm like, maybe, if we wouldn't say, do you have to go potty to a typical 15-year-old, maybe we kind of switch that language. And it's one of those things, it's a habit. It's ingrained for them. So they get it. But even those instances where it's like, let's really reach and challenge ourselves to talk to them exactly like you would their same age peer. Because even people who get it, people are like, oh yeah, they're so smart, and they watch them spell all of these high cognitive level words, and then they turn around and they say, oh look, yeah, it's a white squirrel outside or whatever. Why would there be a white squirrel
I don't
outside?
know, that would be
That
exciting.
just came out of my mouth. Actually, that would be pretty cool. They probably should point that out. I think it's those further implications that they are more like us and they feel just as deeply. I know I touched on empathy. Oh my gosh. The amount of times that Caden apologizes for Gus inadvertently hurting me. And then, to the point where we've said, Caden, you don't have to apologize. We totally understand. And then he's like, no, I need to be able to apologize. Like, that's the control that I have over the situation. So I want to be able to apologize. And so I think, arguably they have more empathy than a lot of us and feel things just as deeply. So that would be, yeah, probably the main thing. I could probably write a book about that too.
Yeah, I've heard people submit the argument that part of the symptoms of autism are because they're so empathetic. Like they can, if they walk into a room, they through whatever, and I think there are a lot of like really subtle physical perceptions that we have that we don't fully realize yet, but
Yeah.
they can pick up on everybody's emotions and that can be really overwhelming. And that is actually what causes some of their symptoms. And then they seem like cold, but it's just because they're like completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you give to a family who is considering spelling to communicate?
Take the leap of faith. Take the leap of faith, honestly. I will say that I know that it sounds kind of bizarre for an SLP to tell you maybe to forego traditional speech therapy, but and you could do both. You could supplement. I have families who do that as well. And I still do traditional speech therapy as well. I don't have anything against it. All of my spellers, the level that they benefit from spelling to communicate is not even in the same realm as what traditional speech therapy is doing for them. And it's so challenging because as soon as you have a kiddo that's struggling with speech, that's the first, obviously that's the first thing you do. Okay, let's get them into speech therapy. Let's get them in 2-3 times a week. Let's, just so intensive. And the structure is helpful. I don't want to say like that it's a lost cause, because they also can build speech. But I do think that getting to a level of unlimited communication often requires that alternative communication. So, take the leap of faith, talk to your kiddo like they understand, make the least dangerous assumption. That's a big idea that we talk about in spelling to communicate a lot. We can't read their mind yet. And so you have to make an assumption one way or the other. They do something and you assume they're doing that because blah, 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 or they're doing it because they can't control their bodies. Saying they're doing that, especially if it's something you don't want them to be doing, making the assumption that they are doing it because they can't control their body is going to land you in such a more understanding place. Not that it won't frustrate you, because of course parenting is tough, especially when they're not doing what we're asking them to do, but it will help you to understand a little bit more, and it will help them to regulate because they're going to understand. Worst case scenario, they throw their Cheerios on the floor for the 10th time and you pick it up and you say, I know your body's not listening to you. And then, well, maybe they were doing it intentionally. What harm is that going to cause? What harm is that going to cause? What if they really aren't doing it intentionally, and then you meet them with, I get it, your body's not listening to you. That is going to potentially change their life. I mean, that's something a lot of times when guys come in, that's the first thing I say to them is like, I get that you're smart. Recognize that I might be the only adult, certainly only professional in most cases, that has ever looked at them and just said, I know you understand every single thing I'm saying, and you don't have to prove that. And so that's what, depending on the age, it's different when they're little, but a variation of telling them like, I get it, your body doesn't listen to you, but I know you understand every single thing that I'm saying. And then just trying to do the least dangerous assumption, which is usually their body isn't listening to what they're telling it to do.
Yeah. And just to touch on maybe MCHS specifically, because, I know there are a lot of people who have MCHS and autism diagnoses both, but it may feel like S2C is something that only works for autism, but I mean, that's not the case at all. So there are obviously some individuals within the MCHS community that their sort of physical deficits that they're working with, they may not be able to do spelling at this time.
Sure.
But just to reiterate, just because it's not just exclusively an autism thing. So
it's absolutely not. Yeah. I have had individuals come in with just, also unspecified intellectual or developmental delay. It's just a different way of teaching. And if you have a practitioner in your area, they will be able to do, you should be able to go in and they will do an initial assessment. It's going to look very different than what like a typical assessment is going to look like for therapy, but they're going to look at the movement of the eyes. They're going to look at how their body responds to different prompting. And so they're going to be able to look for those markers of apraxia in that very first session. You still have that leap of faith associated with it, but we will see the markers of apraxia. The practitioner is going to be able to say, here's what's indicative of apraxia, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that will give a little bit of clarity, I think, for parents.
Gotcha. Sam, are you still doing okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're gonna start wrapping it up anyways, but if you wouldn't mind staying on a few minutes after the podcast, we actually both are a little bit interested in how to become a practitioner. So
cool. Yeah,
we
sure.
can talk about that. But all right. So in closing, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Can you share maybe one of your favorite success stories of I guess you'd call it, that you've worked with so far?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So, I actually had a quote because I was thinking about him this morning. Oh, I have a million. I have a million. I have individuals who couldn't even touch one letter for months. Months we worked on just the hand-eye coordination to touch one letter, who are now openly spelling their thoughts on a keyboard. So it really is beautiful. But one of my guys recently, he's 29, I believe. He started about 2.5 years ago with Spelling to Communicate. He has some unreliable speech. He gets really stuck in things we called loops. So he just says the same thing over and over. And he wanted to go back to his school that he stayed at until he was 22 to do a presentation. So we went and did that a few weeks ago, and he had typed some things for them, and we did some live spelling. And it was just, I'm very proud of him. And I wanted to share a little bit about what he had spelled for that presentation. So he was talking about his school, and he said that, everybody was, he felt a lot of love in the school. And then he goes on to say that he also felt pain. And he says, the pain came from no one knowing that my body is apraxic. What my teachers could not see was that kid understood everything. I could not for the life of me get my body to do what I tried so hard to do. There was something missing that would have reduced my pain, presuming competence. I am certain if I would have been reassured that the teachers knew I understood, that it would have relieved my hopelessness. My ask is this: believe that every student is understanding even when they can't prove that they do. And he just he had pride beaming from him, spelling this. And this is a guy, again, I have video of him. I mean, this is zero prompting. He is typing away paragraph after paragraph on the keyboard. So he has just come so far, and that really isn't a rare story in terms of they start with that direct prompting, and over time they build up to their open-ended thoughts. I mean, I think we have around 25 spellers now. The practice has been open just 3 years, and we have about 25 that are fully open and able to express their thoughts now where they were not before. So yeah, they're all my favorites, and they know that because I tell every one of them that. It's pretty amazing. I mean, even Caden is one of my favorites, obviously, because he's the reason I got into this, but he has one of the trickiest bodies that we work with here, but also I think just he might have an award for world's most tricky body, because he just gets very stuck, and his body very much presents, if somebody doesn't know any better, they might think he's totally in his own little world. And he's just one of the most kind and brilliant people I've ever met. Yes, like I said, I have a million quotes here, but I encourage people, there's a lot of resources on YouTube you can look up. On my website, I have a whole page dedicated with different links, beyondspeechtherapycenter.com. There's a ton on there. There's videos of spellers open-ended on there that people can check out. Caden was part of a book recently that's on Amazon called Lights in the Darkness by Forging Friendships Advocates, which is a great book as well, because I know you asked about resources earlier, and I wanted to plug a little bit for him there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I just want to reiterate one more time that we are talking about spelling from a place of opportunity and not a place of judgment. So if there's anyone out there who has an older kid, or we call them all kids because they're all somebody's kid, and most
Sure.
of them are kids, but they're adults and in
Yep.
the community as well. And we don't want anybody to feel like we're shaming them or judging them because they've never pursued this, because maybe they didn't even know it was possible, or,
Exactly.
as I said earlier, sometimes there are just more urgent issues that you need to address. So, ultimately, everybody, I trust parents to make the best decision for their kids. We just want to tell everybody about this so that they know that it's an option
Exactly.
and it's something that they can pursue if they choose to do so. But Thank you so much for your time, Sam. Thanks to everybody for listening. And as always, you can contact us either on the MEF2C Cast Facebook page or at MEF2CAST at gmail.com. And thanks again, everybody.